Smell like bitch in here. All y'all smell like bitch to me. Right? Why you got so many
Talismans.
Why you got
Talismans.
It's honestly hard to believe it's been over 2 years since Elden Ring first came out and revolutionized the open world genre in its entirety, offering an absolutely massive world for us to spend countless hours getting lost in. Over the decade prior, From Software had made a name for themselves with notoriously difficult action-adventure games like Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and arguably their most infamous franchise, Dark Souls. And despite the success, critical acclaim, and praise these games got, my dumbass still slept on all of them. That's right. Even though I had friends who were obsessed with Souls-likes, I hadn't mustered the patience to actually play one until Elden Ring came out. Elden Ring promised a Souls-like at a scale that had never been done before, with so many branching paths and so much content available to players at launch. It didn't matter if you got stuck at a boss, cause you could always just go somewhere else, explore, get stronger, and come back to whoop that boss's ass. I remember seeing trailers for this game and becoming enamored by the mysterious, magical world of the Lands Between, a once thriving kingdom that was brought to its knees by a great war. And now we as Tarnished get to explore its ruins thousands of years later. And then I heard that Elden Ring's massive open world would be more like Breath of the Wilds, without hand-holding or bombarding us with map markers. At that point, I was pretty much sold. And by the time I had finally beaten Market after 40 tries while being severely underleveled, well, I was in love. Everything about this game is amazing. It really felt like I was having my own adventure through this mystical, enigmatic land. Each hidden area, cave, or legacy dungeon I discovered completely by myself. No map markers and no checklists, just the joy of exploration. I was seriously blown away time and time again by the minute details FromSoft put into the world of Elden Ring. All the branching paths leading into more branching paths I could just get lost in for hours at a time. And while the exploration in this game was absolutely S tier, so was the boss design. Each boss having their own unique movesets that really pushed me to my limits and forced me to learn their attack patterns and dodge timings. There's nothing quite like getting stuck on a boss for hours and either by luck or sheer will, finally beating that boss. I've never actually felt accomplishment in a video game until I played Elden Ring. This game was seriously so good that I just had to go back and play through every single Dark Souls game, just to see what I've been missing out on. After playing Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, having a blast fighting Ornstein and Smog, getting destroyed by Sister Fried's third phase, and falling off a cliff more times than I could count, I realized that these games just get exploration in a way that most games don't. A lot of games hold our hands. They tell us where to go and what we'll find, using map markers and compasses just to make sure we don't get lost. Dark Souls and Elden Ring don't do any of that. We just have to make our own paths, figure out where to go and what to do on our own. And there's something really special about that. And through the sign system, players can help each other by pointing out hidden paths or items, although usually most people are just kind of trolling. Oddly enough though, out of all the Souls games I had played, Dark Souls 1 has some of the best level design I've seen. The branching interconnected paths along with its verticality is simply amazing. And while this may not be the biggest map, it just felt like a maze. There were so many paths you could take that would link right back to Firelink Shrine so organically, it doesn't even feel like you're going in circles. Just looking at the 3D map for this game is mind-boggling. While Elden Ring's map was amazing, it felt way more open than any previous Dark Souls game, which is not a horrible thing because riding through these beautiful open fields on Torrent is an absolute vibe. But when the DLC Shadow of the Erdtree was announced, I was hoping we'd get something a little more, well, convoluted. In Dark Souls, getting from place to place felt like a real achievement, because honestly, the amount of paths you could take was just so confusing. But thanks to the openness Elden Ring offered, unless you were in a dungeon, getting from one place to another was pretty straightforward. Which brings me to now, over 2 weeks since the DLC has launched, and I've pretty much explored most of the map. And wow, the sheer amount of branching paths you can take in the Land of Shadow, along with its incredible verticality, makes this easily one of FromSoft's best open worlds. There are some seriously convoluted paths that you have to discover to get to a place you want to get to. Compared to the base game where it feels like you can almost draw a straight line from place to place to get there relatively easily, the Land of Shadow will have you delve through a random-ass cave just to get to a map fragment, or take a completely different path to access another side of a dungeon. There's a ton I could talk about, but without spoiling too much, I'll just say that you'll probably find yourself Googling how to get to a place, only to be mind blown by the route you have to take to get there. Some people might see this as bad level design or unintuitive, But honestly, I just see it as an adventure, one that forces us to really explore as much as we can and discover for ourselves how to get somewhere. Of course, within this world, we get some of the best legacy dungeons in the game. Shadowkeep easily being one of my favorites for its incredible verticality. Scaling this gigantic tower to get to the boss was such a great experience. And the bosses for these legacy dungeons were just incredible. Weirdly enough, one of my favorites were one of the first bosses that most people would fight, the Dancing Lion. Just such a cool looking boss. I found myself horrified by its appearance, yet enamored by how well animated it was. It just flowed from one attack to another in such a natural looking way. For a solid hour, I was just getting my ass kicked while admiring the boss's design and moveset. But once I finally understood his moveset, I demolished him and was left with that feeling of accomplishment that only a Souls game gives me. Which brings me to one of the criticisms that this DLC has gotten. People have been complaining that the DLC is too hard. It's clear that bosses in the DLC have been amped up with longer combos and a lot more aggression. It's really hard to have any window to get an attack in or even heal yourself. The most frustrating boss for me being Rolana. I wanted to beat the DLC summonless, and she was easily the closest I got to whipping out my Mimic tier. But man, when I finally beat her after well over 50 tries, I felt an insane rush. What people don't seem to understand about the DLC, or any FromSoft DLC really, is that the difficulty is usually amplified because at this point, most people have beaten the base game multiple times. FromSoft has to make the DLC challenging enough for players who have been playing for years. On top of that, they've implemented their own leveling system within the Land of Shadow called the Erdtree Blessing. Basically, the more Erdtree fragments you find throughout the map, the more you can level up your Erdtree Blessing. It increases your damage and damage negation, meaning you can do more damage. And more importantly, you can tank more hits. Personally, I don't see the unfairly hard criticism as very valid. I mean, as someone who is complete trash at these games, if I can beat this DLC summonless, I think it's fair to say that anyone can beat this DLC. Don't be afraid to quit fighting a boss to get more fragments, find better gear, or level up, as that's what the game is for. Don't just bang your head on a boss for hours at a time, as it's a surefire way to find yourself burnt out. And if all else fails, Elden Ring's version of a tactical nuke from MW2 exists, and it's called the Mimic tier. It makes any boss fight exponentially easier. Elden Ring and its DLCs differ from Dark Souls in that it offers you an open world to explore and get stronger in. So take your time and enjoy your journey. In Elden Ring, bosses can be as hard as you want them to be. That sounds wrong, but it's also true. That's what makes the game so great. You could play as a naked man armed with a stick, or you can obliterate bosses with a Kamehameha. So just find a build that gives you the challenge that you want. The only incredibly important piece of criticism I think is perfectly valid is the game's performance. It doesn't matter if you have a PlayStation, Xbox, or a goddamn NASA computer. It seems impossible to keep a steady 60 frames per second anywhere. And in a game where dodge times are incredibly important, it's really frustrating that stuttering and frame drops are so prevalent. This is an issue that should have been fixed when the base game dropped. And now that the DLC is here, it seems like performance is even worse. The lighting, texture details, and polygon counts don't even come close to games like Cyberpunk or RDR2, and yet somehow it runs way worse than those games. It's just unacceptable. That isn't to say that this is a bad looking game though. The art style of the Land of Shadow is absolutely beautiful. Every scenic spot overlooking the Land of Shadow made me stop and really take in this masterfully crafted world. I mean, this shit really is the pinnacle of open world game design and art style. The variety of each location is incredible here. From the uncharted looking jungles of the ruins of Rao to the decrepit, creepy ambience of the abyssal woods. All of it is really well done. All in all, this is easily FromSoft's best DLC. It's almost big enough to be its own game, and they really peaked with their level design. In my opinion, it's the best open world that FromSoft has created yet. Seriously, this map is a joy to explore, and the bosses were, well, not exactly a joy to fight, but their movements are incredibly fun to learn and counter. They've definitely outdone themselves here. Thank you, Miyazaki. As always, though, I'd love to hear your opinion on the DLC if you've played it. What did you love and hate about it? What was your favorite or least favorite boss? And why was it Commander Gaius? I would love to know. Anyway, till next time, see ya.